Welcome, everybody. Thanks for joining us this morning. My name is Dugan Murphy. I am the Executive Director of the Association of Maine Archives and Museums. This is our free online interview today, the Maine State Archivist, who, what, why. And one of the people who will be leading the discussion today is Susie Bock. What do you like to say, Susie?
My name is Susie Bock. I'm the coordinator of the University of Southern Maine Special Collections. Pat?
Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming. I'm Pat Burdick. I'm the head of Special Collections and Archives at Colby College. And Kate.
Hello, everybody. I'm Kate McBrien. I am your new Maine State Archivist. Thanks for having me.
And I forgot to mention that this is being recorded. We'll make it available to people later. So feel free to mute or to mute yourself to keep any background noise from barging in. Feel free to leave your video on or off, your choice, and we will proceed from here.
We have a series of questions for Kate, followed by community questions and discussion. Pat, you have the first question?
I do. So Kate, just on behalf of all of us, a formal congratulations on becoming our new state archivist. And considering your museum background, can you say if you aspired to this position?
Which is an excellent question because I do have a museum background. I come from wonderful Maine museums such as the Maine State Museum and the Maine Historical Society, but I don't come from an archives background. So this, I have to admit, is not a job that was ever really on my radar. I assumed I would just kind of work in Maine museums for my whole career and really enjoy that. And I loved it. I loved my time doing it. But I did find at a point in my career, I was looking for something a little bit different. I needed a new challenge. And when this position opened up, I thought, oh my gosh, what a great opportunity to get to work with Maine history. I see it as a job that also helps Maine people, which I've always been drawn to, and build on some of my skill sets, but also give me the opportunity to learn something new. So I applied, to be perfectly honest, with absolutely no expectation of actually getting the job. I just figured, gotta try, why not? And I was thrilled when I got the call from Secretary Dunlap saying he wanted to chat with me. So, and I think it actually has worked really, really well. You know, I've been able to build on the training and wonderful experience that I've had with museums and applying how to share Maine history, how to get some of this information out and try to engage audiences in the material that we preserve and we collect. So I feel like a lot of the experience that I've built over the years has been very useful here. But at the same time, I am literally learning something new every day, which makes it really exciting for me, which probably means I will make a few mistakes too, but it's a learning process. So it's been great so far.
Could you give us some background description of the state archivist position / duties?
Sure. So the state archivist is actually written into law. It's a position that's required within Maine state law and it reports to the Secretary of State. Within the Maine state constitution, the Secretary of State is responsible for the records of state government. And so within statute, they've created the Maine State Archivist position. And that's really what creates the archives as an agency, is that position. Statute actually lists out the roles and responsibilities of the state archivist. So that really guides what my job is. But it's also, like most statutes, it's pretty vague. You know, how you actually apply it is up to you in the position, which is great. But my role is to be the custodian of state government generated records, to determine which records are considered archival in nature and should be preserved, which ones are not, And so what the state archivist and the state archives does is determine the archival records of state government, but also sets the retention schedules, does records management for state agencies. So we have staff here who work with all of the agencies to actually set how long records should be kept, which ones should be archival and transferred to the state archives, which ones really don't need to be kept forever, but also how long should those be kept then, and when can they be destroyed? Because I always see the state archives as the key to a transparent government. If we're setting how long records should survive and which ones are kept, and which ones are not, it's really up to this office to decide how transparent our government is, how much we are sharing and what are we sharing. My goal is to make government as transparent as possible while still balancing the privacy of individuals. So it's really a more complicated position than I think I ever knew before I applied, before I began to research it and wrap my head around it. But it's a very varied position in that way, and that we destroy records and we keep records. So it's this sort of dual role, which is really interesting.
Kate, I want to make sure I understood you and clarify. You said that the position is created by state statute, the position of state archivist,
Yep.
but not the state archives.
The position in statute is actually the Maine state archivist, and then I can hire staff to fulfill all of those roles. So yeah, that's actually how it's written into statute. It's fascinating.
Great. Thank you, Kate. Our next question, given in the spirit of you learning something new every day, right, is what could you summarize some of your current priorities?
Yes. And I think these are evolving. I've only been state archivist since March, when I was officially appointed by the legislature. But I have actually been working here at the state archive since April of 2020. So I've had some time to kind of wrap my head around what we're doing, what the status of things, how it's been working. And with that, I've also set up a series of meetings with interested agencies, stakeholders around state government, and we're developing a strategic plan for the state archives. That is still in development, but I think the things that we've learned is a few really basic core goals is that we want to make records, as many records available to the public as possible and as easily as possible for them. So one of the things that is a goal is that we're actually going to process more of the collections in our holdings. We have vast holdings that have really never been processed. There's no finding aids for them. We want to create finding aids for everything. We want to digitize as much as possible and what is reasonable, and put that available online for the public to easily access. That's a long-term goal that's going to take, I don't even want to say years, it'll take decades, but it's a good goal. And on the flip side, though, we also want to work better with state agencies to really support them in their needs with their records. Our records management division has been so tiny for so long. And so we really rely on state agencies to be committed to the work. We want to be able to support them better and grow that division so that we can get into the agencies and say, let's work with you on what records you really have. And let's look at it not only from your perspective as the agency who's creating it, but also from the perspective of an archives, of history. What do we think is going to be really important for the future to learn from? So we want to build a little bit more of that support. Those are some of our key goals. With all of that, I also would love to see the archives continue their role in a leadership role around the state, to be a voice for archives, for collecting institutions, to help advocate at the state level for the needs and the preservation of historical documents around the state. I think the archives in the past has done a great job of that, but I think it can grow. And so that's one of the things I'm spending a lot of time with, is getting in front of the legislature and getting in front of committees, to making them more aware of the amazing resources that are available around the state, and really the state's responsibility to help care for those better.
I would also just add to that, Kate, that with your background in museum and now working as the state archivist, that you have this really broad perspective, because a lot of repositories around the state are a mix of both museums and archival, materials. And so you're able to represent both sides, which is awesome.
Yeah, that's what I'm trying to do. And approaching that with the understanding that so many institutions have to balance that care of both paper and objects, and the different needs that come with those. So that's what I will try to do.
We understand one of your first goals is to rebuild the Maine Historical Records Advisory Board. Can you share your vision for the board and the process you will use to reactivate this group, and what the State Archives Board does?
Yeah, definitely. So the Maine State Archives actually has 2 boards in statute that we're required to have. We're supposed to have an Archives Advisory Board, as well as the Maine Historical Records Advisory Board. And that's actually written into law, which is great, because that means there's an expectation, there's a requirement. It also makes them boards that have to be publicly accessible. So anybody can attend those meetings, anyone can participate in those meetings, which I think is wonderful, because it really opens up the process. So the Maine Historical Records Advisory Board, as I'm sure many of you know, had kind of languished for a few years and then died off. It hasn't been active for several years. So that was actually one of my first tasks when I started. Secretary Dunlap at the time said, first thing I need you to do is to get those 2 boards up and running again. What that meant, though, is that we needed completely new membership for both boards. The Maine Historical Records Advisory Board consists of members who are appointed by the governor, directly by the governor. So I worked with her office to appoint and find people, and I'm so pleased at the amazing folks who are participating in that board. We now have a full board, fully appointed, and I'm really thrilled to say they've actually met for the first time. We met early in November, and they're all so excited. We started talking about, as a board, since it was all new membership, what do we want this board to be? What would be the goals? How can this board best serve the state, best serve all the collecting institutions around the state? And I was thrilled at the energy and the ideas, and of course they want to do like everything. So what we're probably going to do as a board, they're so eager, they wanted to meet again in December, so we're doing that. And what we're going to try to do is, as a new board, meet and focus and set some goals of what, as a board, they can really do and accomplish, and what would be most useful for the state. So we're going to kind of go through a process for a few months to really set some of those goals. And with that, the process is to apply to the federal government for funds that the state can then use. But we need to be able to set a program around that for that funding. So some of the ideas they're talking about are, a re-granting program, getting funds that we can then re-grant and make available to smaller collecting institutions around the state for archival projects. Maybe, it could be something like hiring a traveling archivist to go around the state to help and provide guidance, and work with institutions one-on-one. It could be some training programs as well, some workshops that would be available. It could be a mix of all of that. And so I actually to prepare for that board starting, I participated in the federal review of grant applications from other states for that program this year, just to get an idea of what other states are doing, familiarize myself with the process more. And so I think we've got some good examples of what other states are doing really well. And it's just a matter of figuring out where Maine can focus our efforts. But I do think it's a program that can grow. That said, with that board, we also have the Archives Advisory Board, which was completely restructured in 2019 with some different goals, all new membership. It's actually a much more specific membership requirement now, and that the Secretary of State directly appoints board members to that advisory board, and they have to bring specific skill sets. So we need someone from the Attorney General's office. We need someone from a financial office. We need someone with technical experience, and very, very specific. And that's the board that reviews a lot of the record schedules that are created for agencies. They've been meeting very actively this year. They got up and running a little bit earlier and jumped right in and been meeting almost monthly. They are currently reviewing what's called the general schedules for records retention within state agencies. The general records that every agency creates, like correspondence and budget documents and HR files, those kinds of things that every agency would create. They're reviewing and updating those schedules to provide better guidance to state agencies on what they should keep. And it's been a really great process because we're bringing in people with such varied experience and different perspectives. So both boards I'm really excited about, and they're both jumping right in and working hard right from the start.
That's great. Another bit of excitement came in March when the State Archives announced the launch of an online portal for its collections. Can you tell us something about the project?
Yes. This is a project that came out of a disaster, is basically the only way to put it. Many of you know that the cultural building in the state of Maine, which houses the archives, the state museum, and the state library, that unfortunately was shut down in June of 2020 due to the catastrophic failure of our HVAC system, which meant we had no heat, no air conditioning for the entire building. Basically the system that was in that building was so old, they really couldn't even repair it anymore. So they needed to replace it. But in order to replace it, they need to do full asbestos abatement to get to the system and replace the system. So the whole building's been shut down. With that, because they needed to do the asbestos abatement, the archives needed to move all of our collections out of that space. That was about 59,000 boxes of records. And so we did it. We wanted to do it. We didn't want to leave any records in the building during construction. But in order to do that, we really needed to do a good inventory of what was there so we could keep track of where it was going. We actually moved them to 4 different storage facilities. We've got 2 warehouses and 2 state buildings that we're using to store. And so since things are being scattered in so many different locations, we needed to track them all. But it was a great opportunity because it was the first full inventory that we've ever done at the State Archives. So we got a really good handle on what boxes we have. It's all box level, but it's really useful. So with that, we had started using archive space as a digital catalog for the archival collection. But with the full inventory, we could finally use it to its full potential. So we did a full inventory. We uploaded all of that data to archive space, and that allowed us to launch it publicly. So for the first time, if you want to find something at the State Archives, you don't have to come in person and flip through our 3-ring binders. You can actually look on your computer, search for things. I will say it is still just box level at this point. But we are trying to add more information, finding aids, links to scans of documents that are on Digital Maine. We will continue to add to it. and make it more robust. But it's a really awesome first start. So I'm pleased at the opportunity that we can really share that catalog with people.
I just need, this isn't the next question. I just need to say, wow, and well done to get all that information in. You kept saying it's only box level. I think most of us would be still saying, wow, big accomplishment.
We were pretty psyched to actually get to that point too.
Is the Maine State Archives interested in a statewide system to access manuscript archival resources?
Yes. That's the simple answer. Yes. Actually, I was sharing with Susie and Pat right before this program started that at our very first meeting of the Maine Historical Records Advisory Board, Earl Shuttleworth, the state historian who's on that board, that was his question to the board was, well, is there a statewide, source or a statewide system for manuscript and archival collections? And I was very happy to say, well, no, there's not, but there's people working on it. And I think it would be really useful. I think we have some fabulous resources that are available online. We have Digital Maine, we have the Maine Memory Network. These are awesome, awesome resources. We have library catalogs like yours is online. But if we could get manuscript collections more easily accessible and findable, I just think that could open up Maine's history so much to the people who are looking for it. So I'd love to see it.
And we're going to ask people to save their questions to the end.
Okay. Okay.
However, I have just put in the chat the link to the survey that I and Anastasia Weigel have launched in order to gather the data that we need to decide what that Maine Union manuscript catalog would look like. We've only received 29 responses. When the last time a survey of this nature was done in 2008, they got 145 responses. So we urge you all to respond. Even if you don't have a fancy system, we need your answers because we really, this time around, we really want to include everybody. So please be part of this project because, I mean, I think as Kate can tell you, just the only way we can build something that fits the state of Maine is if we have information from the state of Maine. That's my little commercial.
And I fully endorse it.
Thank you.
Okay, so Kate, our last prepared question touches on some things you've already talked about, but just can you talk a little bit about your vision for the future of the state archives and for archival resources in Maine?
One of my very first goals coming into this position was that I want every Maine resident to know that the Maine State Archives exists and that it is a resource, that we exist for them. So that's one of my huge goals, is to raise awareness and get people out. And I'm hoping that in the future, that's how the archives is seen. I also think, though, that as a state archives, we are in a time period of transition where we have traditionally been a paper-based archival institution. We will always have paper, but so much of state government is becoming digitally based in their records creation. They are creating records and data that only live digitally. And so we're going to need to shift in the future for how we collect that information, how we organize it, how we share it. I actually am going to be approaching the state legislature in the next supplemental budget process to ask for a digital preservation system for Maine state government. Right now, we really just don't have a way to capture the digitally born records that state government's already creating, and we're behind the ball. We are late to that process. And we need to catch up before we miss, which I'm sure we've probably already missed records. But we need to catch up. And I think that's really where the future is heading. You know, we manage amazing storage for archival collections that will be kept forever, and we'll always have that, and that will always grow. But right now we also manage a record center for state agencies that are their paper records that don't have to be kept forever. They will be eventually destroyed, sometimes 10 years, 70 years from now, you know, it varies. At some point, that warehouse is going to become a digital warehouse. And I think that's kind of where the state archives is going to be going. It's going to take time. Nothing's going to happen overnight. But I am finding more and more of the conversations that I'm having with state agencies is about digital needs. And that's, I think that's the need for the future. So I see the state archive shifting more in that role.
Kate, as a follow-up question, since you mentioned earlier about engaging with counterparts in other states, it seems like you are starting to grapple with such huge and complex issues. Is there any kind of crosstalk with other state archives about working together?
There are. The Council of State Archivists is kind of like a MAM for state archivists. And they have a program to research and begin to develop best practices for electronic records preservation. So, and they've done a lot. It's a slow process to research because everything's evolving so quickly. But there's a lot of conversations amongst state archives about best ways to do this. Everyone's doing it a little bit differently. Nobody has a super clear answer. I've actually started a working group with the state archive staff from the Office of Information Technology, which is like the IT people for state government, and the Attorney General's office. And we meet every 2 weeks to talk about email retention, digital records retention. We're working through some of those questions, some of those issues of, we know we want to preserve or not keep forever records, depending on their classification, but how do we actually do that? So we actually meet every 2 weeks, and it's been fabulous. We've had conversations with Microsoft. We get them on the phone and we're like, we're running into this tech problem. What do you recommend? I think we've actually found that we've stumped Microsoft, and we're going to ask them to develop some things for state archives. But it's getting the team together to really work through, you know, from the archives perspective, this is what we need. From the Attorney General's office perspective, this is what they want. And then the IT people say, well, here's what tech can do for that. And so it's starting a lot of those. With all of those conversations, we're talking to other states, trying to look for examples, best practices. Really what we're finding is every single state is doing something a little bit different. So there's some initial guidance, some initial ideas, and then you have to bring it back and apply it for your unique state need and state structure. So it's conversations, but nothing, there's no like one, here's what everyone should do. I kind of wish there was, it'd be so much simpler, but we're not there yet.
I'm going to open it up to questions and discussion from the audience. Because there are more people here than I can see on the screen, I'm going to ask you to put your questions in the chat. I'm going to read the first question and then ask Pat to keep an eye. Will you be able to continue your work related to Malaga Island?
Yes, I'm actually continuing a bunch of that work. What's been really nice is that as state archivist, part of my job role is to go out and speak to groups about Maine history or Maine state government or anything that the archives is doing. So I've been giving a lot of public talks about Malaga Island, which has been awesome. I'm also working with several researchers who are trying to dig in, learn more, and I'm helping them. What's been really thrilling for me is that in my role as state archivist, part of my job is to decide records that had been confidential, whether they really should remain confidential or not. There's actually a law within the Maine State Archives statute that states once records come to the archives, once they are 75 years old, they no longer need to be confidential and they can be shared publicly. No one's really applied that law. There's always been confusion and pushback from state agencies about if that is accurate or not. This year I worked with the Attorney General's office, who was pretty clearly unified in saying, no, actually the state archives law trumps all the other ones. And so if it's at the archives, you own it. And after 75 years, you can make it available. So just a couple of weeks ago, we posted online on Digital Maine the Pineland patient records for the Marks family, who were residents of Malaga Island. Their patient records, researchers have been trying to get for years and have been denied. But they're over 75 years old. These people died more than 75 years ago. And there's really no reason to have them confidential anymore. There's no law that says that they're confidential anymore. So we've shared them publicly. So I'm able to do some things like that, which I'm pretty thrilled about.
Great, thank you, Kate. We have another question. For this online catalog of manuscripts, are you thinking of it being a catalog or actual digitized searchable pages?
I'm gonna actually pass that to Susie, because that is totally Susie's project that I love and will help in any way that the archives can help.
We're thinking of it exactly what it being not digitized actual pages, but right now we're gathering the information. I think what we the very beginning want to have is just information on the collections, not items in the collections. It can always grow, but I think that first step is the most important. I mean, we all have, many people have either a digital commons where they're putting up items from their collections, the Maine State Library, there's always already the digital Maine. But what my vision is, me and my partner Anastasia, is what the idea that keeps running through my head. I want a researcher to be able to go to one place and search across the state of Maine for everything Maine has on African Americans in the state. Where are all those collections? Because it's so much more valuable if somebody can not only search my stuff, but at the same time search and what does Colby have? What does the state archives have? What does the Historical Society in Castine have? I'm now making up things. And one of the things I feel strongly about this came to me while I was jogging the other morning and thinking about this. And it occurred to me, you know, USM is probably one of the youngest special collections in the state. If you look at big academic institutions like Colby, Bates, Bowdoin, Orono. And those collections are important, but most of those actually are fairly young. If we look at really the backbone for the state are the historical societies. They've been there the longest. They have probably some of the richest hidden stuff. And that stuff is going to be vital to making this a really wonderful resource for not only the state, but for people outside the state. So, I mean, the more information we can get on all the different institutions, the big state archives, the academic institutions, the historical societies, the museums, the public libraries, the more varied information we can get, the better system we can build to fit what exists in Maine. Other questions?
I was gonna say, and that's a huge goal for me for the state archives, is just the more that we can make archival collections accessible, findable, then people can actually use them. You know, that's really like, that's the whole reason we keep this stuff, right? So that they can actually inform and people can access them, but we got to help them to find them. And I will say at like a high level policy level, if people can find your collections and know they can access your collections, it also raises an awareness of how many and much, you know, vast, important collections are being cared for in Maine. And that's what you can bring to the higher level for fundraising, for support, you know, that there is a huge need. But it's hard for people to wrap their head around a need to support all of this unless they know what's out there.
I see it as twofold. It empowers both the repositories. If we get this information out there, then we can go for grants to help each other out. But I also think of it as empowering everybody in the state. I mean, I say this with my collections. I collect on specific communities on the state. And when I speak to people in that community about the importance, I think, you know, doesn't it make you feel good to know that your history is so important that somebody wants to collect it and use it? I think it's really empowering. And I think it, for the state of Maine to see their history and to make it, to have their history available online to find it, I don't see what better role we can do for the state, for everybody.
Definitely.
If nobody else has a question, I have one. Kate, just listening to you this morning, I heard about at least 2 boards, and it's that, and then you have meetings with IT people. It sounds like there's a variety of regular meetings that you're involved with and organizations. How do you balance that? What's your management technique?
Can I just say I'm really looking forward to next week when almost everyone's going to be on vacation and I don't have meetings scheduled. Just say it is. I mean, it's always a balance. You know, the state archives is part of the Secretary of State's office. So we have regular meetings with all the departments at the Secretary of State, weekly meetings, actually. I have bi-weekly meetings, you know, with these other agencies. I'm working regularly with the State Museum and the State Library on the cultural building project. So there is a lot going on. You know, how I try to balance it is, well, probably don't balance it as well as I probably should, to be perfectly honest. But what I try to do is balance projects by deadlines. You know, what do we need to figure out in order to get a funding request in by this certain deadline? Who has a major need out there? You know, one of the projects that came up recently, which really wasn't on my radar, was retention of social media accounts. That's become a public request that's becoming more and more common, especially through freedom of information requests, that they want access to the Facebook and Twitter feeds of agencies. They want to see who's been blocked, certain comments that have been deleted. There's regular requests for those. And honestly, that just hadn't been on my radar much. But it grew as the FOA ombudsman for the state was starting to get FOA requests from the public for social media, and vendors who can archive social media accounts have been approaching state agencies individually saying, you should buy our product because you need to be archiving your social media. Luckily, in having these regular meetings, people were aware of the state archives and our role, and they looped me in. So I've actually been learning more about it. That's a new project that wasn't really on my radar. I hadn't been planning, but because all these other agencies are saying, oh my gosh, we think there's this need, we need to figure this out now. Well, that's a new project that we're tackling. And I think we're going to try to start a pilot project of archiving a few agencies' social media to begin to test that out and understand the need and the application of it. But again, not something I would have planned for this year, but enough agencies said, we need it now. So you make it happen.
Kate, that's really interesting because I think the pandemic has brought so much remoteness into our lives. And so people are connecting in different ways. Do you see that as a correlation with this interest in social media?
I do, because, part of what we've been discussing, we actually formed a little work group, and it's communications directors from a few state agencies, the IT department for states, someone from the Attorney General's office, the FOA ombudsman, me, and we're kind of talking about social media. What's funny about social media is it's not a typical state record. It's not created and done. It's not a correspondence, that's a piece of paper or an email that's clearly, social media is a constantly living, interactive model. And so how does that really fit within the idea of a record? And so those are some of the questions we've been trying to talk through is what are the expectations of really capturing that? What are the responsibilities for that? And then what's the technology required to actually do that? And I do see agencies, I'm hearing from agencies, they expect to interact, they want to interact with the public, but with the pandemic, people couldn't interact in person. They're finding most people don't really think about writing letters or making phone calls anymore. One state agency put it really well, and they said, people are comfortable with social media. That's where they're expecting to interact with you, and we have to start meeting them where they are. So I'm not sure. I mean, I do think there's some guidance that agencies will need to consider and how they use social media and what type of business they're conducting with the public over social media. But I think it is a rapidly evolving issue that we need to figure out.
I have a question from Holly Hurd, which I'm going to direct to you, Kate, although it's directed to both of us. It starts with, that is a worthy goal, Susie. It seems to me there are some infrastructural, operational problems since most historical organizations typically work independently. Do you or Kate have thoughts about how to connect two large collections to start? Maine Historical Society and Maine State Archives.
That's a really good question. I think what's fortunate is that the Maine State Archives and Maine Historical Society have a great working relationship. I know everyone there, used to work there. Steve and I are serving on the Maine Historic Records Advisory Board together. So I have a lot of interest in sharing as much as possible. I think what we would have to figure out is how do we share that information together? And Holly's totally right with that. Researchers look for both of our institutions for a lot of their research. So how do we simplify that process? We need to figure out a way to share that information, keep that communication really open, and also make it clear to researchers when they're looking for information, who has what. It's one thing, I think that's always part of the problem too. It's like, I'm looking for this information, where does it live so that I can really access it and see it? So I don't have a lot of concrete ideas, but I would love to have that conversation.
I would say from my angle, obviously what Kate just said, here are two of the largest collections, but I would hate to see that happen separately. I would hope it would be part of a general connecting of everybody.
Yeah.
I have a question from Anne, but Anne has said I should have addressed my question to everyone. Did either Kate or Pat get a question from Anne?
I don't think so.
Anne, do you want to unmute yourself and just ask it?
My question, I have never participated in anything with a chat part, so I really didn't know how to do it. And I directed my question to Kate, excuse me, but most of this applies to organizations that are so much larger than mine. I tried to respond to your survey and I got to a point where the question was something like, what kind of records? And there was a whole group of acronyms to select from, and I had never heard of any of them. So it got a little frustrating and I gave up. But a lot of the organizations in Maine are so small, we're all volunteer. I was actually elected curator. Now think about that. No training, no background, nothing. And you have this job given to you. So I'm trying to do the archives, which have never been inventoried or anything. And we have a consultant and all that. That's wonderful. But if you really want to bring in all of this information from all over the state, there needs to be a way for small organizations to participate too. And I'm not sure how to do that because we don't even have any way to digitize our holdings right now. So we have a long way to go, and I don't know how we get the help that we need.
And I'm going to directly send to you my email,
Okay,
and maybe we can set up a Zoom session and the two of us, I'll help you go through, because we really want your input. I hear you. Did you get my email in your box?
yes, I did. Yes, I did.
Okay, send me an email, we're connect.
Yeah.
And even, I mean, I'd love to have you, I'll help you fill out the survey, but I want to just chat with you because
Happy.
that will help us.
Glad to do it. Thank you.
And I'll
Okay.
just add, can I add to that briefly? I think with the Maine Historic Records Advisory Board would also love to hear from organizations of what is your need? What would you like to see? Because I think that's an avenue where we could also provide help, either with small regranting, funds, or having an expert who goes around and helps you with some of these projects. So I think I would love, feel free to
Pete,
reach
how
out.
would you like to get that input?
I'm sorry?
How would you like to get that input? Should people email you or?
I think right now, if people can email me, that's probably the best, and I can just gather information and bring it back to the board.
Kate, would you put your email in the chat?
You got it.
Okay, so there is another question in the chat. A group known as History Trust is trying to create a common portal for researchers to access collections on MDI. Are you aware of this?
Yeah.
Could it be a model for regional work that could then be connected statewide?
I am aware. That's actually a really neat model. I think it works really well because you've got this defined sort of community area. But it could be a model. I think I'd be really interested to see it. I know it's still pretty new. They've been around for a couple of years now. And I'll be curious to see how it evolves, but I think it could be a really interesting.
I'm in touch with one of the people who helped create it, and I'm going to be interviewing her to help, again, gather information about, what were the challenges.
Yeah. No, but it's a great resource. I mean, I think it's taking time to build, really fully build. But it's such a great approach, which I think is so nice. That was one of the things back in my museum days. I worked at, I served on the board of the New England Museum Association. And so I was regularly meeting with museum directors from all the other New England states. And I'd come to board meetings and I'd say, well, yeah, in Maine, we have this big statewide collaborative project, or we've got, a whole bunch of different museums all working together on this. And all the other states would be like, how do you guys work together so well? We don't do that. But I think that's the wonderful thing about Maine is that we all want to kind of work together because we recognize if we help each other, we're helping ourselves too. We all benefit. And it's just not a model that a lot of other states have really been able to embrace yet. So it's great to see Maine doing it.
Kate, I would affirm that by, being an archival consultant and going around the state, that I see these little pockets of collaboration, where people self-define as a community of some kind and then work together on various projects. And it just seems very distinctive to me, because it's so vast that people pull together, around their locales, however they define them.
Yep. Definitely.
We're coming up on the end of the session. Are there any more questions? I'm going to put Maine Archives and Museums, who hosted this today, is always looking for new programming ideas. And if you have a topic you would like addressed, or which you would like, or on which you could speak, please contact Kate Worthing. I'm going to put her email in the chat. And we were going to offer, Kate was going to offer to take care of any questions we didn't get to today, but we pretty much took care of everything. Kate, we really appreciate you taking time of what we now know to be an incredibly busy schedule to spend this time with us. And I thank you.
Thank you.
And I would echo that, Kate, in saying that, you're bringing marvelous new and creative energy to the position. So it's just a really exciting time for Archives in Maine. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And I'm so thrilled to see so many friends that have attended the program. It's really good to see you all. So thank you so much for inviting me and chatting. And if anyone else ever wants to just chat or has an idea you want to share, give me a call anytime. It gets a little too isolating being in an office in Augusta. So give me a shout out. It'd be great.
Well, thank you, Kate, for speaking for us today. And thank you so much, Susie and Pat, for leading this discussion, and everybody else for participating.
Thank you, everyone. Have a great day.
Bye.
Bye.